Hello, and welcome once again to Denton's Tales. The Finglas Viking Woman. Well, now, actually, she wasn't a Viking in the strict meaning of that word, but I'll come to that in a moment. We recently had a public event here in her honour, attended by the Norwegian ambassador to Ireland, which was held near to where she was found. And that is the reason for this video. She has a very important place in the archaeology of Ireland as it relates to the so-called Viking Age. Now, I live in the North Dublin suburb of Finglas, in the region known as Fingal. And those names actually derive from Viking times, coming from the Irish Fingal or Fingenti, meaning a fair foreigner, or in other words, a Norwegian. The Danes were also called Dovgal or Dovgenti, the dark foreigners. These terms first appeared in the Irish annals in 851 AD. The majority of Norsemen who settled in Britain were Danes, while here in Ireland the Norwegians were in the majority. The two groups didn't always see eye to eye either. There was a great battle between Norwegians and Danes in Dundalk Bay on one occasion. Now, some people have argued that the terms actually referred to old or new settlers rather than ethnic differences, but the majority opinion, well, it seems to favour the latter, so we'll go with that one here. Viking raiders had been attacking Ireland since 795 AD, concentrating mostly on wealthy monastic sites and churches, where most of the wealth of the day was to be found, so it made perfect sense to attack those targets. And Dublin, or Difflin as it was known to the Norse, grew out of a small settlement near the mouth of the river Liffey, established over the winter of 840 to 841 AD as a so-called longport, where the Norse raiders could safely berth and repair their ships without having to return to their bases in Britain or Scandinavia. Towards the end of the 9th century, as families rather than raiders began to arrive in increasing numbers, settling down in Difflin, the former Longport grew into a major town and trading centre. At that time, the area now known as Fingal was several miles to the north of Difflin, and it had been a target for Viking raiders in previous times, containing as it did several monastic sites, including St. Canice's Abbey. Now, that abbey had been founded in 560 AD by St. Canice, who became the first abbot, which is probably why they called it St. Canice's Abbey. I mean, makes sense. Most of it was probably wattle and daub construction, and no trace of it remains today. Excavation of the site where it stood isn't possible due to a shopping centre and a church built in the 1840s that sit right on it. Now, there is a ruined church just across the road, however, the old St. Canice's Church, it's called, which would have lain at the boundary of the former monastic site. It was built in the 10th century and added to up to the 12th century, which would probably make it the oldest ecclesiastical building in Dublin. But when the previously mentioned new St. Canice's Church was built in 1843, it fell into disuse, and today it is a roofless ruin. Now, it has been somewhat restored of late, I'm very glad to say, with ivy being removed and the stonework pointed. But it has a small and very interesting graveyard attached to it, and that was the setting for a remarkable archaeological discovery. In August of 2004, excavations were coming to an end at the northern end of the old church. Some medieval finds had been made, including a considerable number of skeletons, which were removed for reinterment elsewhere. Now, apartments were being constructed right up alongside the church grounds, and the archaeologists, well, they were making sure that nothing of interest would be lost as a result of the construction. Now, there was a ramp where vehicles were going in and out beside the churchyard, and considerable debris had been piled up there awaiting removal. Debris from the construction site, matter dug up by the archaeologists, all this was piled up there. But there was one small patch of undisturbed ground. And the archaeologists in charge thought, well, why not dig it up? Dig it up just for the hell of it. Now, there was no real reason to dig up that little piece of ground more than anywhere else, but I suppose undisturbed virgin ground amidst piles of rubble and dirt does call to an archaeologist. Dig me! I'm right here! Dig me! And that is what he did. He found a skull. But nothing very exciting about that. I mean, they found lots of them. And he assumed this was another medieval burial which would join the others being relocated. Well, it wasn't very deep. It was quite close to the surface. It didn't really require a great deal of digging. A person lying with one hand upon their shoulder. But as he poked away at it, he discovered a brooch. Yes, a brooch. Now that changed everything. This was a Christian burial site, but the brooch indicated a pagan burial. There was also a comb in the grave. Now, Christians did not bury people with grave goods, as they're called. This was pretty obviously a Viking grave. Or, well, I should say a Norse grave rather than a Viking grave, because the term Viking only applied to those who went somewhere in a ship and did something nautically related. And the brooch also indicated a woman. The typical attire for a Norse woman was a long underdress with a pinafore-like shorter overdress, and its shoulder straps would have been secured with either oval or trefoil brooches, and often a chain linking them. Now, you never see that in TV shows like Vikings. Their costumes are, well, they're simply vaguely medieval. They could really come from anywhere. And they don't resemble genuine Old Norse fashion. Now, if you enjoy entertainment, well, then you watch Vikings or Vikings Valhalla or The Last Kingdom. But if you want historical facts and accuracy, well, get a well-researched book. Or indeed, watch my videos, said he, quite unashamedly plugging his own work. But I mean, if I don't blow me on trumpet, who's going to? Anyway, now this was an oval brooch, the first of its kind ever found in Ireland, and it would have belonged to a person of some status. This was a very precision-made item, and it would have been very expensive. It was copper alloy with silver and gold wire worked through it, and 8 little images of animals with glass eyes sticking out all around the edge. And there were traces of the chain that would have linked the two brooches together. Given its time in the ground, of course, it was very, very fragile, just as delicate as an eggshell, and it had to be very, very carefully handled to get it out of the ground without breaking it. This was a major discovery, one of the most important Norse burials found in Ireland for over a century, and female burials from that period were quite uncommon anyway. Unfortunately, later drainage work had destroyed both the lower legs of the body, and one shoulder was also damaged. But it was really almost a miracle that any of this body had survived, sort of sandwiched as it was between drain pipes. How the later work didn't destroy the entire body, it's really hard to work out, but it didn't, fortunately. As well as the beautiful brooch, there was a very long comb made from bone, possibly an antler, a little wooden box or casket decorated with bone ornamentation, and various copper alloy ornaments. There was also a short iron hook, which was underneath the body, which was a bit of a puzzle, but it may have been on a belt that the woman had been wearing. Possibly she hung her keys on it. That seems to me to be the best explanation for it. She had worn a tweed overdress, and incredibly, a tiny little piece of the fabric was found preserved behind the brooch. Quite amazing for being in the ground for over 1,000 years. The woman was between 25 and 35 years old and well built. Generic analysis seemed to indicate that she had had blonde hair and blue eyes. She was about 5 foot 7 inches in height, which was very tall for a woman in those days, when one considers that Norse men averaged 5'7" or 5'8". No, Vikings were not huge, massively powerful men, as most movies might like to suggest. They were pretty average for their day. Oh, very strong, yes, and fierce when they had to be, but not towering over other people, as many people would imagine the Vikings to be, these great big enormous men. DNA analysis showed her to be 80% Norwegian, and by the quality of her brooch, which has been established as being of Scandinavian manufacture, she must have been at least reasonably wealthy, certainly a member of a very good family to have had an object of this quality. She was catalogued as VK544, and her brooch, comb and other items can be seen in the National Museum of Ireland. Now, VK544 herself is not on display, I'm sorry to say. She's salted away somewhere in the museum's storerooms, though there is a male Norse burial on display in the museum. What was very interesting was this woman, apparently a non-Christian, seemingly buried in a Christian burial ground. Now, by the time of her death in the 9th century, there wouldn't have been a great deal of conversion to Christianity, at that time, though, of course, later on, most of the Norse in Ireland did convert, which makes a bit of a joke of the oft-quoted reason for Brian Boru fighting the Battle of Clontarf to drive the heathens from the shores of Erin. We'd have had a job to find any heathens in Difflin by 1014. So, was she an early convert, or was it simply coincidence that she had been buried so close to Christians? If she was a convert, well, there was certainly no sign of a cross, and her brooch was very pagan in style. Now, one theory that has been trotted out is that she was given as a bride to an Irish chieftain to cement an alliance, as the Norse were very keen to establish alliances with native Irish rulers for both trade and defensive purposes, and that might explain her grave near a Christian burial ground, a mutually tolerated union for political expediency. That is quite a good suggestion. Her DNA, of course, rules out her being an Irish woman married to a Norseman, obviously. Or she could have come as a child with the first Norwegians to settle in Difflin, or perhaps even been born here, making her a first-generation settler. But of course, I mean, that's just guesswork. We have no way of knowing. All we can say with absolute certainty is that she was Norwegian, a very early resident of Difflin. She was pretty wealthy, and she's dead. Yes, very, very definitely deceased. So that is the story of VK544, the 9th century Finglas Norse woman, not a Viking, as I pointed out earlier, despite the title of this video, since she wasn't doing anything related to seafaring when she died. Well, Viking, it's eye-catching. It gets people's interest, and every news report, every newspaper article about the find called her, incorrectly of course, a Viking. Everybody gets that wrong. Whatever she actually was, I certainly hope that you enjoyed this video, and I hope that you will tune in for the next one. Until then, I shall say goodbye for now.